In the culture in which I was raised, it was considered charming to tell long, entertaining stories about peculiar relatives or a one-array hog or anything under the sun except yourself. Prolonged self-revelation seemed discourteous to me and self-aggrandizing and is vulgar. So I love the way that she feels that she doesn't want to do anything about her biography, but she on her website actually writes one much more detailed than this, but I thought I would just do some highlights of this. So she was born in Maryland, but at age 2, she moved to East Central Kentucky. She grew up in a childhood of books, the outdoors, living creatures, and no adult supervision. A little bit like Demon, she ran all around outdoors, digging up things, playing with friends. When she started school, she entered every essay contest at school. Her first essay is Why We Need a New Elementary School. And she wrote about how the teacher had plaster fall on her head from the ceiling and got injured. And she actually, that got published before the school board bond issue, and they ended up getting a new school. And for her, that sort of showed her the power of writing, even though it was not something she was thinking about as a career. Why is that not next? At age 8, her family moved to the Republic of the Congo, where her father volunteered as a physician. She lived with no electricity, no running water, but still was enjoying the outdoors and playing with children there in a completely different life. After a year or so of being there, they returned to Kentucky, and then we sort of jump out of her childhood. She did a lot of other, things, studied a lot of different things, but remarkably enough, in 1973, she started at DePaul University. Got another person jumping in. Started at DePaul University on a piano scholarship. And then once she got there, she changed her major to biology, thinking a career in writing was as likely as a concert pianist, movie star, or people who can fly. In 1978, she moved to Arizona, working as a lab tech and working on her master's degree in theoretical population genetics. And also she did a lot of scientific writing for the medical college while she was there. In 1985, she finally decided to be a full-time freelance writer, earning $6,000 a year. And she met and married Joe Hoffman, a chemist who was at University of Arizona, that she met there. And she wrote her first novel, The Bean Trees, while she was pregnant. And actually, as she was finished with prayer, she was cleaning up the house and was about to throw the book out. She had the manuscript and was chucking it while she was cleaning up. And she decided, she sent it to a publisher and said, I think this is a novel, so I'll send it to you and let me know what you think about it. And as you know, that got published, and that was the start of her career. She's had 9 best-selling novels, including The Poisonwood Bible, which was an Oprah's choice. In 2000, she won the National Humanities Medal, and she currently lives in Southern Appalachia. And there's much more about her life. If you go on her website, Barbara Kingsolver, I think it's .org, you can read a lot more detail. That's just a little bit about somebody who started out as a concert pianist and ended up a, award-winning novelist. So you never know where it's going. I thought it would be great to show you. This is a map of Virginia, and all the way down here in the corner where my little arrow of the red is, that is Lee County, where the book takes place. So it's this very tiny corner. And if you picture it, West Virginia is to the north, North Carolina is to the south, directly south, and then Tennessee is sort of southwest, and Kentucky is to the west. So there's a lot of places surrounding that little section of Lee County, but it's all the way over in the most western part of Virginia. So Melungeons, which they talk about right away in the beginning, that Demon is a Melungeon. These are a couple pictures of Melungeon families. Melungeons are a group of people with mixed ancestry, primarily descended from free people of color and white settlers. They mostly live in the Appalachian Mountains, particularly eastern Tennessee, southwest Virginia, northwest Carolina. There are also groups in Ohio and Louisiana. History, their ethnicity has been in question since the early 1800s. Oral tradition led the Melungeons to believe they were Portuguese descent, but a study published in the Journal of Genetic Genealogy points to African ancestry. The term Melungeon comes from the French word mélange, a mix, which means mixed. It's one used a derogatory term, which of course we hear a lot in Demon about derogatory terms for people of not only mixed race, but poverty, and a racial slur, but has since become something to be proud of. Physical characteristics, typically having dark hair and light eyes with stark contrasts in their skin and hair color within a single family. And some notable people that they thought to be Melungeon include Abraham Lincoln, Elvis Presley, Heather Locklear, and Ava Gardner. And for those of you not necessarily familiar, here's some photos. And I think, from the picture we saw at the beginning, Lincoln It shows some characteristics. Elvis, Heather Locklear, I'm not quite sure. For those who don't know, this is Heather Locklear over here. This is Ava Gardner. I don't know how many people know Ava Gardner. She was a big actress in the 40s and 50s. She was married. Frank Sinatra was crazy about her. She did a lot of great movies. I'm sure everybody pretty much knows Elvis and Abraham Lincoln. I'm going with that as a given. And Heather Locklear, but there's some famous people thought to be Melungeon. So that's just a little bit about the Melungeon. And as we go to get ready for our discussion, the questions that we asked you to look at were: how does Kingsolver introduce the major concerns of the novel in chapter 1? Why the attention to Demon's fondness of drawing and his skill at it? To what extent does the concept of family inform these chapters? How does Kingsolver deal with the subject of stereotyping? Is it reinforced to a point, or challenged, or what's the effect? And most of us enter the novel as outsiders, and the characters may seem other to us. Is the author successful in helping to understand her world? How? And I will stop the share so we can get going. There we go.
Okay, so let's, you can just break in anytime. This is, those of you who've been with us before, this is not a lecture at all. So just, you know, say what you have to say. Okay, but I wanted to start with like one of the most obvious things, and that is the title. Why Demon Copperhead? Why Demon? And why Copperhead?
Copperhead's his hair, and he's a demon.
Copperhead is what?
His hair, right?
Well, that's right. Yes. What else about Copperhead?
Well, I think it's like a snake in the grass. I think to me, it's like going to be something not good. A demon copperhead, you immediately are like, don't go trudging around in the woods in Lee County.
But didn't he talk about how like everyone's scared, says they see copperheads and everyone's scared of them, but no one's actually really encountered them in the wild? They're just like this theoretical fear that everybody has and wants to talk
You're
about.
absolutely, you're dead on. And so why do you think he included that?
Well, he says that, but having a property in North Carolina, I can assure you they're very real. And I've encountered them. In fact, most often you see them dead on the street because they like to sleep on the cement, the warm cement, and then they get run over. They're not a snake that really willingly attacks, but if provoked, they will.
Okay.
I think it also sets the tone for the parallel to David Copperfield. So it's the same initials and the parallel words, and so you're starting out recognizing there's a connection, and if you want to look for the parallels, they'll exist throughout the story.
And what does he think about his name?
Well, his name is Damon, right? And he changes it to Demon.
Yes.
And the Copperhead also I mentioned that his father was from a family of snake handling religious people that, handle live snakes. And that sort of tied a little bit to his father as well.
With a tattoo.
Right.
Tattoo exactly. His arm.
Okay, very good, very good. And later in these pages, he gets a new name, Diamond. Remember, fast forward gives him that name, and it's because he is so strong.
He's what everybody wants.
Yes. Yes, very good. Very, very good. Yeah. So, just starting with that, we were introduced to this for me, this is a world I don't know, right? I mean, this is a world I was, totally, the world of the rural poor is totally, it's just something I've never encountered. So I'd like to start with the kind of, the attitude that you gain as you're meeting this narrator. how do you feel about him, and how do you feel about his world? How does he make you feel
Before we
about
even get to that, I had the feeling he was talking to me personally. He was telling me a story. So
it? Yeah.
She kind of sets the tone for him on page 2, where she writes, likely the bastard is doomed. And so from, you have high hopes for him often, but always the challenges.
I think
Yes.
the first part of it to me is like out of the box, you're feeling bad about everything. I mean, at some points, it's almost kind of hard to read for me a little bit. I mean, they put you in the situations and you feel so bad for everybody. It's horrible, frankly, a lot of it.
And yet, what is there about him? I mean, it's sort of interesting to me that we do know something about his future from the first words of the novel, don't we? How do we know?
That he made it out?
Yeah, yeah. He's writing this. He's writing this. He's telling us his story. Okay. So, even at the beginning, there's that feeling of, okay, well, wait a minute. This life absolutely sucks in just about every way, right? But he's somehow survived. We don't know how he survived, but he's surviving, right? And and immediately we get to know him. And I loved what you said about how he's talking to you. I mean, I think that's a very, very strong element of the narration. A lot of folks will uh, compare it, compare his narration to like Huckleberry Finn, Holden Caulfield, and the what we live with is a sense of episodes. There's a here I'll give you a little quiz. What is a picaresque novel? If there's a table slap waiting here for somebody who knows picaresque novel.
Wait, didn't we discuss this? Something like it's a serial set of stories, right?
You got it. You got it, buddy. It's
Good
episodic.
Yeah.
It's an episodic, and when you think about it, every big episode, and it's Tom Jones was an episodic novel. Huck Finn is an episodic novel, and so it's almost that as we follow his life, which he tells us, I'm going to try to do this in chronological order. I can't always do it though. I just have to get off from time to time, and he does, and it's always effectively. But most of those times, or many of those times, you get to see, okay, here's a guy, here's a narrator that somehow captures the essence of childhood, but is speaking to us as an adult, right? I mean, which is a pretty damn good trick. Like you're and that's why I think part of the reason why we laugh with him at times, because he's such a kid, and yet it's a reflective narrative. He's looking back at his, you know, at his own past. So, what about the way when you were reading? I mean, I know that Derek, you were saying, "Geez, oh God, this is like these are awful lives these people live." So, but I guess the other thing is one of the questions is that since we I think most of us anyway are outsiders to this world, how does she manage to bring us into the world?
his descriptions are comedic in a way, and it's an adult looking at a child's world, but his descriptions of the apartment houses and the bird's nests and the way he was born, being in a sack on the floor. It's an aspect that you wouldn't expect a child to have. So it's an adult looking back at it, but it's a terrible circumstance. But he's being funny about it. He's sly and
Yeah, that's
keeps
really
you
good.
interested.
Others?
I would add on to that the idea that, hello, sorry I'm late. I agree, it's the comedy and it's the fact that it's a kid. So it's almost like, this kid is learning how this world works and you're kind of learning right alongside. So it's kind of
Oh,
like a
excellent.
really
Excellent.
accessible
Yeah.
way to do it.
I think a lot of the villains in this book also are pretty clearly defined. So, I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot of gray area about who's a jerk, who's a loser, who has nobody's best interest at heart. I think it's easy to pick through and to just say, the Peggotts are one way and Demon is one way, and then you've got Stoner, who's clearly, the worst of the worst, and then you've got Crixon, the guy that's overworking the kids and only using it for child labor and stuff. I think that's how she's also, beyond what Charles said about descriptions. I just think she's made it so easy because she's just giving you the worst of the worst and kind of right up front, and that's kind of what you've got to go with.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. Do the rest of you? I mean, I tend to agree with you. I mean, somebody who finds Stoner as an admirable character, really needs like therapy or something. But anyway, the do any of you see more gray in the villainous characters?
You look at Fast Forward,
Like,
he goes
yeah.
both ways. He's he's a star, but he's also exploiting the kids and taking their money and doing other things. So he's a mixed kind of character, I think.
Okay.
And
Others?
I think the more you read, like the more you get comfortable with it all. Like you said, I'm not familiar, like I've never lived in that area before. But I think the more I read, everybody got more gray because it seemed like really that was just every day. Like this was everybody in their neighborhood was sort of an evil character. So that made them more gray because it's just what it was.
Okay. Others?
I think his mom was probably the grayest character for me because you vacillate between wanting to be very angry with her and then also just realizing that she was, a product of her environment.
Well, the social worker too, right?
Oh, that's
Because she wants to
which
do
one?
all these, she makes it sound like everything's going to be so great and honky-dory, but meanwhile, she knows that she's sending him off to a work camp. I think that maybe there is some gray there when I think about her. But again, that's probably like the worst case scenario social worker, so it's kind of easy to put them into those kind of boxes.
Okay.
Question I kind of had about like just morality is there's a certain privilege to being able to like bring morality into the decisions that you make, right? Because a lot of these people they are the situations that they have, so you don't really have you can't look at the horizon if your head's underwater, right? So a lot of these people are so just trying to get the day-to-day of the teacher trying to make their way to school. Even like the farmer that's overworking them, he has 3 crappy acres of land that he's trying to do, and the boys that he is helping them aren't the best workers. So he's even he's just trying to make do with desperation with what he has. And then of course joking when the mother was even saying, well, this is my first paid rehab program, so obviously it's going to be better. So it's almost like, can you even really ask about morality or good or evil when all you're thinking about is like the immediate next step to put the fire out of like, how am I going to eat? How am I going to get my fix? How am I going to pay the tax bill? I'm going to bring in an extra boy to help pay the tax bill.
Yes. Yeah. And, Kingsolver often said that, one of the things in this particular novel that she was looking to do was to sort of foster an understanding of a part of America that most of us just don't understand. How else do you think she does that?
I think she does that with the universality of like children's experiences. Because like even though my upbringing was diametrically opposed to what Demon Copperhead has, we all went to the aquarium. We had that kid off in the distance that we thought was cute, that we were scared to talk to or liked, or played in the mud and ran amok and had authority figures that we didn't like. Like, even though we're coming from very different orientations, we still had similar like core memory experiences that is, I don't say universal around kids, but just general childhood like memories.
Okay, good.
I think
Other
it's
ideas?
I feel like thinking about the way that, because I listened to the audiobook, I didn't read it, but the way that I sort of heard it, it's so weird because like, you know, you're talking about like the University of Childhood and like the acceptance and almost non-judgmental part of it, where it's like you're it never seemed like true anger or like real malice or anything like that. I mean, except for like the biting part with Stoner, but it's like this yearning to like understand what's going on around Demon and trying to like make sense of it, and like kind of, you know, in the first chapter he talks about, you know, being a fighter and like how that sort of informs his how he maneuvers the world. And I think just sort of it seems like there's a lot less judgment in it, and it's almost, it seems more accessible that way, in my the way that I heard it.
Mhm. One thing, you know, even when he bites Stoner, and you know, I mean, I'm there saying, you know, you go and bite him, right? But then afterwards, he goes to the Crixons and he and he gets told, yeah, you know, we don't like biters. You know, we worry about the biters. And there's something that's, you know, just I remember making me laugh because here's this kid torn from his family or his mom, you know, going to this place where he knows nobody, and there's this, and he's worried not just about what is it going to be like to live in this totally new environment with people he doesn't know, but oh my God, they're not going to like me because I'm a biter,
And
you
it,
know. And I mean, there is something to me that's very well. It's humorous, but it's so real.
yeah,
That's, you know,
and his
exactly. He said,
reputation,
yes,
his
yeah,
reputation preceded him, so he's at a disadvantage when he's starting out, knowing that he has to overcome this reputation as being a biter.
yeah, and that's it's overcoming. I mean, there's so many, you know, the elements like of the, you know, the hero's journey, which is to overcome one obstacle after another obstacle after another, and I think that ties us to him as an individual. What about the other? You know, I had sort of a related question that I sent on to you about stereotyping. Um, could you say that the Kingsolver is trying? I mean, because she did say, "I want people to understand the people. I want other people to understand the people in this world. You know, this is important uh, to me in writing this book." Um, so, you know, I'm asking, does she succeed in doing that without stereotyping, or must she include some stereotyping? Do you see stereotypes in the?
I think she tries to give some of the background of stereotyping, like in chapter 9 when he goes out to Crixon's and the kids call themselves the hillbilly squad,
That's
you
a
know,
really
and that part where they're like, you know, rednecks, moonshiners, ridge runners, hicks, like they throw out all the things, you know, you think you say about people that live like that. They sort of call it on themselves. And I think that's one of the things that makes Demon so interesting because he's so resilient. He sort of knows all these things and he's
Mhm.
has such a terrible life, but he just seems to forge on and just take it as something that this is the way it is. I know, and I know he doesn't know anything different because he's never been exposed to anything different. You know, I mean, as the book goes along, he'll be exposed to different things, but he's never been exposed to a normal childhood. I mean, living in a trailer with a mother that's a teenage pregnant drug addict, to him is just, yeah, that's what a lot of people around here are. That wasn't anything too different, you know, and people knowing each other and helping each other. And I thought she did a good job of, even though she was calling out stereotypes and doing it, but the whole idea of how they work together to help each other and look in on each other, starting with like Mrs. Peggott right at the beginning. They're on their way to church and she's like, you know, I better check on that girl and see what's going on. And lo and behold, there she is on the floor, you know, passed out with the baby rolling around in the amniotic sac. And, you know, can imagine that was such a vivid picture in my head. I'm like, can you imagine just walking in the door and seeing that going on? It was crazy.
But then
she's
it becomes funny in a way because, you know, when, you know, the great thing is that I'm never going to drown.
right. I love the whole,
You know,
that
and
whole
that's where,
idea,
you know,
that
that's where
concept.
you see the, you know, the kid like, this is pretty cool. You know, I might have been, you know, swimming around
Anything else
in
could
that
happen to
amniotic
me.
sack,
Right.
but I'm never going to drown. Though he's afraid of bathtubs.
One thing
Right.
I'd say that Ginny just sort of jogged my mind about that I was thinking about was, to me, Melungeon is brand new. Like I had no idea that Melungeon was anything. And I also think it's funny that she hasn't gone down the typical road of what we sort of always hear about, which is, to me, black and white racism. This is Melungeons, and she hasn't even said the word like, and I'm sorry not to be offensive, but like a white trash type of trailer situation, which is a stereotype all in itself, but not the typical black and white that I think that we are always reading about. Like now it's Melungeons and, you know, this like hillbilly kind of hick group that's out in this Lee County. To me, all that is sort of brand new. So, you know, I think it's interesting that she hasn't gone down that just black and white road, which obviously everybody does.
Now, if you
Unless
have
it's coming.
Well, Demon makes a comment
never know,
about
what?
you know, he thought everybody you know, at school had a Mima and a caseworker and was given a free lunch, right? That's all of them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If you have the book in front of you, on page 68 is the passage that Ginny's referring to, and although
While people are looking that up, I have to say, you know, talking about stereotyping and you just mentioning white trash, somebody gave me, I don't know, like when I was out of college, the white trash cookbook. And it, thinking on it now, like listening to Demon talk about that, the way people like in TV sitcoms and movies, as the book goes along, you know, how people stereotype people. And I was thinking, you know, like that was a book, the white trash cookbook. It has things like the mayonnaise and potato chip sandwich, where you'd have mayonnaise and potato chips on white bread, and you know, all kinds of crazy recipes. And yet you wouldn't think of doing that, I think, to any other types of races or whatever. Yet people think it's okay to you know, make fun of people who are hillbillies, you know, or rednecks or whatever, you know, all the things she refers to.
Yeah, but there's Snoop Dogg's cookbook, Jenny.
What?
There's Snoop Dogg's cookbook. It's a real thing.
Snoop Dogg's the man. He's like into everything right now.
No, but that's like a couple of years old, but yeah.
Is it?
I do think that food, though, when you read the entire novel, food does play. I mean, it does add a sense of normalcy where Mrs. Peggott's cooking the pot roast or the venison, and
medicine,
he
yeah,
says that you've never eaten until you've had the venison.
yeah.
But then again, like how I just was cringing when he was working at the convenience store and basically he was living on hot dogs, right?
Okay. You just did a little violation.
I'm sorry.
You talked ahead.
Did I? I guess
ahead.
maybe.
But notice how gracious I'm being about it.
I'm sorry.
I didn't give
I
you
read the whole book,
or
so it's
anything.
hard to come back
I
to
know it
chapter
is.
13.
I know.
I
But
still,
but we'll get there. But
Doc,
if you look at the passage, right? Hillbilly is a word everybody knows. But for many other reasons, it's a word that I wish I didn't know. But anyway, we won't go there. except they don't. Mr. Pegg at one time had a sticker on his truck bumper, Hillbilly Cadillac. But I was a small kid with no comprehension of anything. I mainly knew it from this one rerun that came on Nick at night, Beverly Hillbillies, which was the family running around the city wearing ropes for a belt, packing antique rifles, and driving a junk ass truck. Dead hilarious. More so than most of the old black and whites they ran, Gunsmoke, Monsters. And then after, the next paragraph, meaning what? There's not a person here that carries on like that or drives such crap, I assure you. Not even the antique tractor club guys that tuck their shirts in their underpants and drive their ancient machines in the Christmas parade. Those guys are just old. But shooting the lights out, yodeling, keeping pigs in the house? Maggot told Bonnie to go screw her stuck-up boyfriend she met in governor's school and leave us be, which she did. But I did wonder. That's such, to me that is such like to begin with. This is I think like an example where the kid, he's the kid thinking about it at the time, but he is also that older self making a judgment about people who do stereotype so so strongly.
He also says in the next paragraph with that, when he asked Mr. Pegg about it, because he didn't really know, that he said hillbilly is like the N-word to him further down. When he asked him, he said, I asked, did it mean something bad? And he didn't even realize that it meant something bad.
And the final, I mean, sometimes her final paragraphs of chapters just like, knock the socks out. Like, and this one, the world is not at all short on this type of thing, it turns out. Meaning, okay, I know now, I'm older. All down the years, words have been flung like pieces of shit, only to get stuck on a truck bumper with "Up Yours Pride." Rednecks, moonshiners, ridge runners, hicks, deplorables. And I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful, sort of encapsulation of her attempt to show sympathy and understanding for this, this sort of outlier class to so many of us. Yeah.
I was gonna add just,
Yeah,
oh,
go.
sorry. I was going to add just one more thing about the stereotypes and the people who have sort of done a little foreshadowing. Is it actually helped me to kind of think that maybe I remember reading this and I was like, this feels like all the stereotypes playing out, where it's like the abusive, narcissistic, stepfather who comes in and like ruins, this poor kid whose dad died before he was born, to a pregnant, unwed, teen mother who like is trying really hard to like do right by her son. And I was like, I was kind of like, all right, come on. But it sounds like someone was saying like, and not to call you out in a bad way, but like you're saying they get more gray as it moves on. And I was like, oh, maybe it's a device. It's a way to make it accessible to us newbies to be like, okay, I recognize these stereotypes, and it allows us to kind of like latch on to something and then break it down as the novel progresses.
Yeah, that's really smart, because
Thanks.
after all, she's, she gives us some stereotypes. She does. I mean, there's no question about it, but then she works to break it down. I mean, like that guy Crickson, it's like, oh my God, what a sorry excuse. But then, you find out what is his life like, running this small farm. His wife has died. He's all alone. Okay, yeah, you don't like him, and and he might have some characteristics that that would come close to stereotyping. But there's some understanding. The only one that I have trouble with finding and understand, any kind of sympathy with is Stoner. But did any of you?
I mean, I don't have sympathy for Stoner, but he talks about wanting to more or less make their family respectable and instill discipline. And obviously he goes about it in a very terrible way and it all backfires. But I think maybe what he says and what he does are, that's the dichotomy.
Yeah, I mean, he feeds that stereotype of like the biker, the tough guy where you're scared of him, but it's like, what else is going on? I mean, we've all sort of seen or read about that person. So, it's a pretty.
Yeah, and from a socioeconomic angle, though, like he's unquestionably the most, successful.
Yeah.
Person. I mean,
except for June.
Like, yeah, June. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah. And June we like.
I think that's another stereotype is like they talk about June being beautiful and smart, and then when you meet fast forward, she's handsome and athletic. So like the stereotype of good looking people or smart people being better off, that also plays out. Also the language of the book, I think.
We're having trouble hearing you. Is there a reason for that?
Oh shoot, probably. Hold on. I was using can you hear me better?
Yes.
You were
I was
super
using my earphones because I was.
I mean, I thought I was,
You thought your hearing was going.
I know. I mean, it's like one thing after another. It's like too many damn things are happening. Okay. Yeah. So go ahead.
I was just saying how the stereotype of smart and beautiful people is also in the book because you have June and Fast Forward who have looks and talents of different types, and they're better off than the other people in the story. And then also just the language that is used to tell the story, I think helps you to relate more to that world. Like it starts to go into your head and like you're saying it and like you think and speak that way.
And yet, when you think about it, how else could the narrator speak to us, right? Because I mean, even though we realize, okay, well, this guy has survived enough that he's writing this book, that he's writing this book, sort of autobiography, right? So you figure, well, okay, the guy has had has talent, and maybe you see some of that artistic talent with his drawings. Maybe that's that shows that there's an artistic bent in him that would enable him to then speak. And as you were saying, he writes, well, she's writing, but he writes so graphically, so specifically. The imagery is so strong, and there's an artist element about that. Yeah.
I wanted to say that with Stoner, from the very beginning that he's bad, because if you remember the conversation they have in the diner with his friends about not wanting to get the car with the trailer attached, all talking about the fact that he really wanted the mother, Demon's mom, but did not want Demon, he wanted her and he wanted to be with her, but didn't want to. And they were having this whole coded, conversation that was going over Demon's head about not wanting him. So from the very beginning, Stoner, wanted the mom, but didn't want Demon as part of life. He was from the get-go trying to get Demon out of there. And his whole idea about discipline and stuff wasn't about, I don't think in the least bit, trying to make Demon have a better life. It was like, I'm going to control you. You're going to be under my thumb, the my way or the highway kind of life. And Demon was used to being out on his own. Let's face it, his mother didn't pay any attention to him. He ran wild all through the neighborhood and hung out with the Peggotts. And now somebody comes in and wants to tell him exactly what to do. It had to have been a huge shock to him. And not to mention telling him he couldn't hang out with the Peggotts anymore. You know, that he couldn't be with Maggot because that, you know, he was going to put up with that. But I feel like there was nothing, all I can think, I mean, obviously for me, because I've read David Copperfield many times and you're reading this, but the, you know, Mr. Murdstone of David Copperfield is so horrible, and Stoner, they're both the really horrible people, you know, who didn't want a little boy with the mother that they wanted. And were controlling personalities. I see them as somebody who wanted to control, even with the mom, control every aspect of their life, like how much he demeaned her when talking to her, you know, about her rehab and different things. You know, he was not a nice person. I mean, I found nothing redeeming about him.
I don't know where this falls within these 5 questions. I hope it doesn't derail everything, but
Doesn't matter. I mean,
I'm curious about what everybody has to say about it. But for me, Demon's father really is an interesting character because at this point, I kind of feel like there's something going on with the way that he died, the way that Demon says it, like he just drove off into a quarry and like, you know, like there's no real detail about what kind of a guy he was, or, you know, why was he with, you know, why did he stay so long, but up until the very end with this drug addict wife. And it just, I think he's a very interesting character and they really don't talk about him too much. I'm just curious to see how that's all going to unfold if it ever really, if we ever get to the bottom of it. But the way the Demon has talked, he's definitely skeptical, I feel like, of how the events went down of his father's disappearing or going, you know, dying.
Right. We get those 2 stories, you know, his mother's story about the day he was born, where she never even mentions the father or anything to do with the Woodall witch, you know, that she talks about. And so he is kind of a mystery that we're hoping by the end of the book, we're going to know a little bit more about his dad, you know, and what he was like and what he was thinking. But you don't, all you know is like the bathtub thing.
Right. And but my gut is like, he's a good guy, which is where I don't, you know, like my gut is he's the best guy in the story other than Demon, obviously with potential and hope. But to me, I feel like the dad right now in my mind has the biggest, has the highest ceiling to be maybe the most stand-up guy so far in the book, but we'll see.
I'm being wary at this point of being sucked into a characterization that may be erroneous. You know, Stoner's bad guy and the mother's an addict. And what if something changes later on? And will my opinion change? But I feel like I'm being set up with an impression that may not hold going forward. So
Well,
I
I
want
mean,
to read some
I
more
had
of
that
it.
same thought. I had that same thought too. I was wondering how truthful or how much to believe the narrator, because he is so engaging and you instantly find that connection with him and you wonder exactly, like, am I being set up for something? Is something going to happen?
you know, it's funny that
And I also never read David Copperfield, so.
Right. You don't have to, but it just for
you,
me, that
Yeah,
whole
but Hillary,
Murdstone
that's the key
Stoner.
though.
Hillary, you have to stop with the. You've already
I know,
apologized
but
online to me with that. You know, it's okay.
I know, but like maybe I would have
told
some
you
kind of
guys.
insight.
But
Actually,
Hillary,
it
that's the
spoils the
key.
book
Do
for you
not
because
worry
you know what's
one
going to happen to people.
nanosecond. I said, don't worry one nanosecond if you haven't read it.
Yeah,
And so,
but that's the thing though, Doc, right? I mean, like Ginny mentioned it, Derek's asking a question, and like if you've read it once or 6 times, David Copperfield, that's sort of like the Rosetta Stone to this, right? So like you don't want to ruin the story.
I can be perfectly honest, it actually ruins the story for you because you
Right.
know what's going to happen to
Like-
people way ahead of time.
Right, because Lee,
And
you
that's
mentioned
kind
at
of
the
a
end
disappointment if you've read it.
Right.
You're
Right.
hoping things might turn out differently, but they don't.
Right, Lee, you said the end of the last course, it was an awesome book, and so this was the next course. And so like I didn't read Copperfield since GA, so I read it with this, and like it ruins the story because who just asked the question? It was you, Hillary, saying, or someone, like, what happens to Stoner? Well, what happened to Murdstone?
So the thing about it is, great writers are master manipulators of us, right? We're in a way we're kind of puppets, right? Do we believe Demon? Would you call him a reliable narrator? Keeps telling us, I'm trying to tell this the way it was or is, right? Um, but so even if you think that he may not be entirely, you know, reliable, just because we all, recreate the pasts, right? When we are looking at the past and the present, right? So, given that, isn't that just part of, to me, a strong kind of part of the manipulation of the author, right? She's not letting us feel all that comfortable, right? Um, and yeah, and she makes us, she tells us enough about the father, right, to get us very curious, right? And we're almost a fifth through the book, but we really know nothing about him, pretty much, except that he died and that he's buried somewhere far away. That's it, right? Yeah.
Is that another stereotype? The absent father you know nothing about?
Well, yeah. I mean, think about it. I mean, this is a fatherless world, except for Peg, right? There's the very clear, and I was thinking about this because I do some tutoring, literacy tutoring for ur- urban kids in Philadelphia, and one, a constant is how they grew up fatherless and the effect of the lack of a father figure has been. And I mean, this is no accident. Why one good father? Why? I mean, what is she suggesting? What is Kingsolver suggesting? And
I
again,
feel like it,
go into down the stereotype road, right? Okay, well, it just now you're just saying, okay, rural poverty fathers are the kinds who will abandon their families, right? I mean, you could say that, yeah.
I was just gonna say, I wonder if it kind of contributes to like the hero's journey, where it's like there is literally no example set, so it makes it that much more, I
Excellent.
don't know, rudderless. So there's nobody to like be like, nope, do this thing. He has to figure out what's right, and what's wrong by himself. And
Uh,
as a kid, and so you're kind of like watching, being like, no, 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 don't do that. But you know,
and I always forget, when I read it the first time, when I read it again, that in these pages the kid is 10 years old. He's dealing with this world at age 10. And at times, I remember the first time I read it, I said, well, no, how no 10-year-old thinks like this. But I think I'm really wrong.
It's
Well,
crazy
you
when you think
mentioned,
about 10-year-olds that or if you know any 10-year-olds, like to think of them living the life he lives and doing what he's doing at the age of 10. When I think of the children that I know that are 10, like them be able to handle any part of what's been happening. But I was curious to ask as a question too, in chapter 6 and talking about fathers. So Mr. Peg is like our only sort of father, and yet his daughter Mariah, the whole story in chapter 6 of Mariah and Romeo, how Maggot ends up being by himself,
Yeah.
being raised by his grandparents because his mother's in prison. And I was curious to what other people thought about that sort of chapter where they informed you, what happened to Mariah and her husband Romeo before she slit his face open. That whole story, which is really kind of horrible. Um, what she was trying to, sort of reveal to us there about Maggot and about the Peggotts, and and her whole life, because that was sort of a veer off from
Mm-hmm.
the plot that, you know, we were following. Now suddenly we get this story within a story about how Mariah ended up in prison. And I was wondering what people thought about that section and about that story.
And
That
again, we have that story, but we don't have the story about his father, right?
Right, right. We know what happened to Romeo.
Why give us that story?
Right.
I
That made me
think
so mad. That
Yeah.
story made me so mad.
Didn't it? Her being
Yeah, like,
chained out to the deck, you know, and him leaving her there.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean,
that was the most visceral, like, yeah, same.
don't trust the authorities is almost what I don't know if that's the lesson, but the
have a
wrong
good
person,
lawyer and you know, you're not somebody anybody believes.
yeah.
this also takes it out of David Copperfield, though. It puts it into the stereotypes of like Jerry Springer and crazy, unacceptable, wacky behavior, where it kind of sets it like now, you know what I mean? Not with David Copperfield 1800s, you know what I mean? I mean, it's a very American, crazy story, you know?
So that's one of the more obvious or you know telling examples of sort of the criticism of America.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
the
The
judicial
system.
the judicial system. Are there others that you're seeing emerge in this first section?
Certainly the welfare system or the Department of Social Services, how they handle kids.
Well, not just how they handle kids, but what their options are, what facilities
Right.
are available, and what resources. Their hands are tied by lack of opportunity to do something different than what they did. But that's again a reflection on the society that we don't provide that.
You know, and even his counselor, you know, she's just waiting to get her degree so she can get out of it, right? I mean, she wants, you know, she wants to be a teacher. She doesn't want to, you know, that's it's pretty clear. You know, she's doing this as like a, I don't know, like a first job kind of thing. And but you know, she doesn't want to be part of that system.
From a 30,000-foot view, the whole thing is so hopeless. But the way that he tells the story and you walk along through his journey, the way the demon's living it out, there just for whatever reason seems like there's some light at the end of the tunnel. But right, the foster system, you know, the kids going wherever and the social workers. I think it's crazy. You were talking about Romeo, or not Romeo, but when Stoner tells that the Peggotts are bad people and he can't go live with them, they don't even research at all. They just take it for 100% truth. And, you know, he's not allowed to go there. And then he gets thrown into a, you know, foster situation based on, you know, Stoner's word to somebody who doesn't do any of the due diligence to find out anything. I think, you know, it just seems like everything is so doomed for failure at this point.
So you
So
kind of get a insight. Demon mentions, you know, 10-year-old kids getting high on pills, foolish
yes,
children. I mean, this is pretty early in the book. And obviously that's a foreshadowing, but I wanted to circle back to a comment about Demon's artistic abilities.
yeah.
And one thing you know, what a bright spot. And the fact that these are Demon's talents, only Demon's talents, right? Nobody else has this. And it's recognized by his peers, by his teachers. You know, so this is something that Demon himself possesses.
And fast forward. I mean, fast forward notes it, which is
Yeah,
really.
I'm saying that's his peer, right? The kids understand how good he is. But also it becomes a escape valve, because he can then talk about the superheroes, the supervillains, right? He can kind of take the good and bad things in his life and put it into a comic or a caricature.
It's a great word. Karen took it right out of my mouth, but escape for sure. Figuratively and hopefully later on, literally, that will be his escape. So that's what I'm rooting for. I'm rooting for.
So talk about some of the really important. I mean, this is such a novel of character, and in that way, it resembles Dickens. I mean, these are memorable characters with memorable names. I mean, have you ever read a book with a character named Maggot? No, I mean, I haven't. Um, you know, but it's not just their names, but it's their unique characters within his story. So, and we've kind of, we've talked about the baddies and we've talked about some of the good, but what about some of the quote unquote minor characters like Maggot? What role? Why is Maggot here?
His sidekick.
Okay, he's the classic kind of sidekick. Yeah. What else?
Yeah.
Well, you can tell there's something different about him, and so it's like, how are people treating him
Mm-hmm.
and viewing him within this world, where there's probably not, I mean, there doesn't seem to be anyone else like him.
And there's that fast forward where
I love him. He's my favorite character.
and I meant the actual fast forward in
Oh,
where he says how uh, how Maggot was sort of pinching makeup from and he said, well, the worst thing was if he's going to steal it from Walgreens, but there was that you're right, there is that he is made unique, isn't he?
Yeah, I don't think though, as far as being a sidekick, he doesn't seem to be taking any of the heat that Demon takes, and he also doesn't seem to have it worse off. So it's kind of, I'm not quite sure it's like a textbook version of a sidekick to a degree, because he doesn't have it worse off. He's got it better. He doesn't seem to step in at times. I mean, obviously he can't at the farm and stuff. I mean, they go and visit him. They go and visit Demon. But I don't know. I don't think textbook wise he's all that much of a sidekick that I'm thinking of, because he's not really like there to soften any of the blows, it doesn't seem like.
Hold that thought, Derek.
I think it's interesting that he's a character that for the Peggotts and Demon, he's very different from what they're familiar with, just like the other characters are very different from what we're familiar with. That his being, wearing makeup and earrings and being very different, the Peggotts can't understand him, and and yet they sort of accept him, and Demon accepts him. And it's not till Stoner points out that he's not somebody he thinks he should be with that Demon's like, what? What do you mean? And I think that's interesting, because for us, I think, at least for me as a reader, you could see that this is somebody who's really peculiar to the Peggotts, and they just can't figure out, what's with him. He's not like anybody we know, and he's our grandson.
Yeah. But what does he provide, Demon? What does he provide? I mean, because he is, he's. I would agree that he's not a sidekick per se, but there's something that he provides, Demon, that he doesn't seem to be getting anywhere else.
Well, he's the closest thing Demon has to a brother.
Ah, yeah. And when he's with him, he's he provides a refuge, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And that's something that, somebody who was, like Demon, he's fatherless. He has a very, very erratic mother. And then once Stoner comes, it becomes worse, which is why, of course, the idea of being separated from Maggot is such, a horrible thought, right? But there's a real sense of refuge there. Yeah.
He's their he's the only family they know. I mean, Mr. and Mrs. Peggott and Maggot, that he spends more time with them, eating meals, living in their house. I mean, you're best friends with somebody from a very young age like that. You just feel like you are part of their family. You're comfortable there. It's a place you can go to. And Maggot is somebody who's known him forever. And so he's not judgmental of Demon about anything he does. And Demon is the same way to him. He's not judgmental of Maggot.
Maybe it's like Maggot provides one of the few places where Demon can actually be a kid. Because everywhere else he has to be like a caretaker or like a worker or like, a manager of family affairs. And with Maggot, they just go and hang out in the backyard and like, get bitten by snakes.
And play in the mud.
Yeah.
They just, play in the mud, yeah. Now, what other characters do you think that play a significant minor role here and help flesh out his story?
I was thinking about Tommy, known as Bones, with his skeletons, and also the Wild Man. The other, I'm trying to think what his name was, that they called Wild Man, was his nickname.
Yeah.
That took a beating on the farm. The other two boys on the farm, besides Fast Forward,
Yeah.
Are minor characters, but they each represent something different in the story and something different to Demon.
What about Tommy? How do he to me is an interesting character to include in that, crazy farmhouse world. How is
Well, Demon talks about
Tommy?
him. Demon talks about him as like basically the perfect kid that any family would be lucky to have, but that he is fat and old, so he's out of luck, basically.
So yeah, and back to what you were saying, Derek. This kind of overwhelming sense of horror that you see in this world. I think Tommy, sort of he counteracts that. He's a kind soul. Just the little things. Think about is Demon really outside of the package? Is he at all? Has he lived a life where somebody would give him a T-shirt to sleep in? No. No. This is like this is an act of generosity and kindness that he finds, and I think that the interspersing of these kinds of episodes for by Kingsolver prevents us from sort of going into a total doom and gloom mode, right? I mean, there's something, and always the fact that Demon is telling his story. He's telling his story to us. So somehow or other, unless there's some sort of like crazy ass thing that he's talking us from the dead or something like that, he is, we know that he has survived. So we have to sort of, and because we know that, there has to be something that's positive. And these little nuggets, right? The nuggets of somebody like Tommy. And now one of the more interesting characters to me in the minor role is Emmy. What do you make of her? How does she sort of part of part of this puzzle?
That's Humvee's daughter, right? Who lives with June.
Yes.
Well, her dad was awesome, apparently. So I forget who was saying it about Demon's dad. Like, what about him? So, like, do they have a similar father situation?
Well, yeah. Apparently, this guy's gone. Demon's father's gone. Um, but sure. I mean, but how is Emmy sort of like, this? She's a girl who lives in the city, right? And the city is pretty awesome and scary to Demon, right? I mean, he's like, you don't ever see the people. There are a lot of them that live there, but you don't see them, right? And he says, well, there are like 1 million of them in that apartment building, 1 million, but you never see them, right? So she's part of that different world, of that particular episode in his life. And how does she, and let's say expand it to does Knoxville and Emmy and June, how are they part of his growth?
Well, Emmy, it was a potential relationship, but I was turned off by the fact that she had lots of boyfriends. She's flipped from one to another. But potentially she was going to be a relationship, but he never called her because his mother said he couldn't.
Yeah.
So he was restrained from going forward with that.
But why does he become so attached to her?
She talked to him.
Very, yeah.
They
Excellent.
had those nice little, late night conversations. But I also
Yes.
think he saw her as somebody who had a kind of nice life. He had,
Yeah.
she had June who liked her. She had food whenever she wanted it. I mean, forget how this kid was dying for food. He was starving at Creaky's. And, going to McDonald's and having, one little burger, one of his visits with his mom. But here was a Emmy who had plenty of things to eat. June did nice things for her, took them places, took them to the aquarium, tried to make his life as nice as possible. And he saw her as like maybe a hope of what a nice life could be like. And of course, she did spend that time talking with him, and he sort of fell in love with her, like a first crush kind of thing, because they shared all this, time together. But they're young kids. Once again, you're thinking he's 10. They're not 15, they're not 17. He's 10.
No, but I think he's like, isn't he? He's pretty mature for 10, though, as we were just talking about.
He's lived a heck of a life for 10, but he's still 10. He's not,
totally.
not
But I do
planning to
think
elope at 10.
I think at the aquarium, it's interesting though. One of the emotions that
that's a
he
big scene.
that he hasn't been able to exhibit is to comfort and secure someone else. Bang!
Yeah.
I got a slap. I got a slap.
I know. I know. I told you would eventually.
I just think that he was able to do that when she was scared of the sharks, and that's something he had never done before. And of course, that's going to open the door to his heart, I would think, because it's something he's never been able to do before, and he had a chance to do it. And she's beautiful, and hopefully, to Lee's point, everything in this book has been made out to be so ugly. I hope that doesn't happen to Emmy, but we'll see what goes on.
Well, but the thing is, that he is, it's a time when he shows empathy, right, for someone other than his mother. And there's almost a purer kind of empathy, because he said, she's an addict. There's plenty of negatives that he puts forth about his mom. But with Emmy, this is just like a pure, to me, a very, very pure example of what he is, what his depth is. I mean, he's this guy has a soul, regardless of, his history, his background. Yeah. And that's the cool, well, it's the cool thing about sort of reading the book episodically, because it's like, what the hell's going to happen with Emmy? What's the next step? And that's kind of cool to think about. And so we're at the end.
I was just going to say, we're just right on time here to end. And I think we should be doing chapters 14 through 26 for our next section. And as soon as Doc has some questions ready, or even if you have questions to submit, you could send them to me that we could add for our discussion for the next chapters. But 14 through 26 will be next week when we meet on the 19th.
Let me
And I
throw in one
want to
question.
thank everybody for
Yeah.
being here. This is terrific.
Quick
Yes.
question, go back to Tommy.
Yes.
With his preoccupation with drawing skeletons,
Yes.
what's that going to predict about his future, his view of the world, and what's being pointed out with this?
Yeah. Well, that's, and again, that's something that maybe we'll find out next time, right?
Right. We should jot
Gotta
some of
be
these things
summer more
down so that as we go on,
Yeah.
you can pick up on them.
Yeah, and you could just shoot Ginny some emails with your questions. I mean, I make up questions.
I
That's
like
sort
the
of-
Doc makes up the
that's
questions,
the
but it's great if
bonus.
you submit questions too, or if you have things you want to talk about, please let us know, because we would love to direct the conversation the way you would like to go.
I mean, I've been doing this for 100 years, so I'm very interested in your questions.